I have said on this program 100 times in 7 months, minimum, that Joey Votto is a Hall of Famer. There is no doubt in my mind. And that's the end of that story. Scroll up here a little bit, Paul, please, okay? Yep. That is not what we were talking about here yesterday, okay? Now, I made a comment, and Tracy asked me to walk back on and on when I said he's had some bad years. Was that the word I used, or a lot of bad years?
You said a lot of bad years.
All right. Well, I will take back a lot of bad years. But I will stand by some years where, say 1 year he led the league in on-base percentage, which we'll get to in a minute, but he hit 12 home runs and knocked in 50 runs. Now, to me, that is not the definition of a great year. Everybody's different. If you put the stock in the on-base percentage as being the be-all and end-all, you're entitled to that. And I'm not going to scream and call you names like many of you did to me on Twitter yesterday. I'm not going to do that, all right? I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to turn this into some personal thing because I disagree with you, and nor should you because you disagree with me. We can have a civil, logical discussion presenting Exhibit A, Exhibit B. Something to think about, okay? I said Joey Votto will be in the Hall of Fame, that the generation who will be voting when he comes up will put a lot more stock in stats like on-base percentage, OPS, than perhaps older voters who look more, for first baseman especially, in home runs and runs batted in, okay? So let's start with that. Concession here. Votto has led the league in on-base percentage 7 times. The only other players to ever do that are named Ruth, Bonds, Williams, Hornsby, Cobb. Right? I mean, that's murderer's row right there. Some of the best of all time. The very best in the history of the sport. Votto has been in the top 10 for on-base percentage and OPS in 9 different seasons. And if that is your primary argument for him being in the Hall of Fame, first ballot I'm talking about, let's put aside, to make sure we understand each other, we're putting aside, is he a Hall of Famer? I am saying to you, yes, undeniably, Hall of Famer. My argument is when I hear people say, first ballot Hall of Famer, I say not so fast. Because I think there are other things you have to consider besides just cherry picking a certain stat or two. His career slash, 297 hitter, 415 on base percentage, down to 412 I think now, 519 slugging, career OPS over 930. Stats are fantastic. But as I said yesterday, when compared to the average Hall of Fame first baseman, that's like an oxymoron. But for the guys that are in the Hall of Fame as first baseman, there are numbers where Votto clearly comes up short. Home runs. 300 home runs, 2,000 hits, 1,100 RBIs. Those are not automatic bursts into Cooperstown, especially not on the first ballot. And I reflect on 2 other first basemen here, okay? Now, I'm going to start with Freddie McGriff. Freddie McGriff has been on the ballot for a decade for the writers to vote on. They never voted him in. Okay, now, in fairness, because McGriff did not walk as much, he has about 15, 16, 1,700 more at-bats, and that's a lot more at-bats than Votto, okay? Freddie McGriff hit 493 home runs. And again, we're talking about a guy now being voted in first ballot Hall of Famer. Make sure we understand each other here, okay? Because some people tend not to listen. We're talking about first ballot Hall of Famer. Freddie McGriff waited a decade. 493 homers. That's 151 more than Votto. McGriff had over 1,550 RBIs. Votto has 1,100. McGriff scored 1,350 runs. Votto scored 1,100. McGriff has almost 2,500 hits. Votto has 2,093. McGriff's on-base percentage, nothing to sneeze at now. 377. Votto 412. Freddie McGriff won 7 Gold Gloves. Votto's won 1. A better comparison would be Todd Helton. Okay? Much better comparison. Helton had roughly about 850 more at-bats. Okay, now let's go down the categories where Helton's numbers in every one of these categories, every one of them, is better than Votto. And he has sat on the voters list for 6 years, and he's not in the Hall of Fame. 369 homers to 342. 1,400 runs scored compared to 1,145. 1,400 runs batted in compared to 1,100. 2,500 plus hits compared to 2,093. On base percentage, Helton 414. Votto 412. Helton, higher slugging percentage. OPS, Helton better. WAR, just about a wash. Votto a little bit ahead. Helton is the best example that I'm giving you as to why Votto may not be a first-ballot Hall of Famer. Again, he is a Hall of Famer and will be a Hall of Famer. I think he should be a Hall of Famer. I'm saying first ballot, not a slam dunk by any stretch of the imagination. One more set of stats to think about for a second. And I've already conceded to you the on-base percentage, where he's among the very best in the history of the game. Among all the enshrined first basemen whose careers began since 1950, no Hall of Fame first baseman has fewer home runs than Tony Perez and Orlando Cepeda, 379. No first baseman since breaking in since 1950 has fewer than Orlando Cepeda's 1,365 runs batted in. Cepeda had to wait for 20 years to get in the Hall of Fame. So, that doesn't mean that Votto has to hit those numbers to be a Hall of Famer, because he's better in other areas than those guys are. But those do stand as we sit here today. Those are factual, very real numbers that are good barometers for measurement. At least they have to count for something. Thoughts?
So let me chime in real quick. Just the point I'm here is to give some stats, some credence. You said that Fred McGriff won 7 Gold Gloves, I believe. He didn't win a single one.
The article I read yesterday, you sure about that?
I'm on his baseball reference page and doesn't have a single Gold Glove on his stat sheet. And then, in fact, his defensive WAR is almost 200% worse than Joey Votto's.
All right, hold on a second. Okay.
His D-WAR is negative 17.3, and Joey Votto is like negative 7.
Well, then I apologize for that part, because the article I read, and I don't know where it was last night, I'd have to find it. Okay, so go ahead.
So, yeah, what was the defensive metrics are what they are.
Okay.
Secondly, about Fred McGriff, you mentioned the 493 home runs and the power numbers. Fred McGriff's career slugging percentage is lower than Joey Votto's, just basically meaning that if they register an at-bat, it's more likely that Joey Votto's going to have more total bases than Fred McGriff.
Okay, let me interrupt for a second. I'm not going into the well of, comparing a guy's slugging percentage here.
Okay.
I'm not going in that well because to me, you can make stats do whatever you want them to do in a lot of different ways. Yeah. The only point I'm trying to make here is you had one player that had 150 plus more home runs than another, had more hits than another, had more RBIs than another, had more runs scored than another, and his on-base percentage wasn't that much worse than the other. One at 380, the other at 412. Mm-hmm. Okay? So I'm not going to get into the slugging percentage means he would have hit more home runs, but whatever it might be. I'm just saying when it comes to being a first ballot lead pipe cinch Hall of Famer, those are the numbers for Fred McGriff. And he waited a decade, and the Veterans Committee had to put him in.
Yeah. So the only other thing I'll say is that if the argument is that Joey Votto is a first ballot Hall of Famer, which I think is the
Time out a second now here. I am going right now, and it says Fred McGriff.
5 All-Stars, 3 silver
This,
sluggers.
Where am I reading this here? Because I just clicked on Google that says, how many gold gloves did Fred McGriff have? It says he had 7.
According to Baseball Reference, if Baseball Reference is wrong, then that's where I'm getting my stats.
Okay. Well, I've just got one sitting here in front of me that says he won 7. But go ahead.
Yeah, Fred McGriff played 500 more games than Joey Votto. But if the argument is that Joey Votto is a first ballot Hall of Famer, I would say that, and this is just my opinion on it, it is very unlikely that he is, just based off what we've seen. Now, there is a first ballot Hall of Famer in the name of like Willie McCovey, who Joey Votto has. I know you don't want to go back to slugging percentage, but Joey Votto has a higher career slugging percentage than Willie McCovey. Played like 700 less games than Willie McCovey, right. So that's where the 200 home runs can at least be a little bit of discrepancy.
Okay.
But if you're asking my opinion, Joey Votto is a slam dunk of a Hall of Famer.
No doubt about it.
If you're asking me if he is going to be in the Hall of Fame on the first ballot, I would say it is incredibly unlikely. And it also depends on who's on the ballot. So you mentioned Todd Helton, who's not in the Hall of Fame yet. He's been on the ballot for 5 years. The reason for that, and I told you guys this before the show, is that the voters, the way that they currently process votes is you get 10 selections. And for the longest time, people were voting for the steroid users because they were bogging up spots on the ballot. You know, Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, guys that weren't steroid users but should be a Hall of Famer like Curt Schilling, who's not in for other reasons. And then you can go down the list, Gary Sheffield, yada, yada, yada. So people were recognizing that Todd Helton's going to be on the ballot. I only get 10 picks. I'm going to choose to use my votes for Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens. So Todd Helton didn't get votes for the longest time. Now those guys are off the ballot. Todd Helton will be in the Hall of Fame next year. I'd say it's a slam dunk.
Yeah, good chance.
Yeah, he's already at 72%.
Yep.
So that's the reason that Todd Helton isn't in the Hall of Fame already. He would have been in on pretty much any other era in the first 2 ballots. So those are just the points I had.
I think the fundamental issue with many of the people that, and we'll get into all of it because I think it's actually something that's topical and something that I think is worthy of a conversation, although it might not be directly sports related at times. Down the path here, we should get into the fact that, you know, Twitter, for whatever reason, it's largely because it's mostly a cesspool, but for lack of a better term, it always turns into personal attacks, which is, I think, the thing that obviously deep-rooted bothered you because you felt like within the clip, you expressed that you feel like Joey Votto is a Hall of Famer. You're making the case that he's not clear, guaranteed first ballot. And I think that's more than a fair take. The only thing that you said...
And I'm not suggesting he shouldn't be a first ballot Hall of Famer. I'm suggesting that you're going to have a group of voters. You're going to have a group of voters where by the time he comes up, and Lord knows how long that's going to be. I mean, he might come back and play great this year and want to continue playing somewhere else, whatever it might be. So he's got a chance to add to these numbers. Okay? But there are going to be a lot of voters that say, well, the on-base percentage is a reason, number one, that he should be in. Okay, well, again, entitled to that opinion, and I got no problem with it whatsoever. I'm just trying to lay out from a broad perspective that there is more to being, in my opinion, a Hall of Fame player than what your on-base percentage is. I think there's much more to it. And I was just trying to give a lot of people out there who spewed a lot of hate yesterday, thinking I said something about their brother that was a misrepresentation of the facts. I said the guy's going to be in the Hall of Fame, but that number is going to mean a lot more to the people who vote in 7 years from now than it means to a lot of people who currently vote now.